Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the fourth session in the series of Clubs and Spades, organized by the Calcutta Heritage Collective. Today, we celebrate the World Heritage Week 2020 by exploring the heritage of another of Calcutta's premier establishments, the Bengal Club. Hidden behind some rather ugly high-rise buildings on Chaurangi lies Calcutta's gem, its oldest town and business club, the Bengal Club. What stories do the corridors of the club hold? Why do visitors have to step over a black cobra as they enter the portals of the club? How and when did the club lose its magnificent building? Did Macaulay really compose his memorandum on English education in this building? What lessons can we learn from the experience of the club on the challenges of conserving and restoring a building which is a living and functional institution? I will be discussing these and other fascinating stories today with two members of the club, Sri Partho Ranjan Das and Sri Sumit Ray. Hello, Sumit. Hello, Parthoda.
Hi, good evening, Jaideep.
Partho Ranjan Das, as you all probably know, is a prominent conservation architect who is now serving on the committee of the club with special responsibilities for conservation and restoration of the heritage of the club. Sumit Ray, a chemical engineer by profession, who runs a pan-India digital media marketing organization, is the co-chair of the Heritage Preservation and Project Subcommittee of the club. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. Parthoda, clubs were introduced to India by the British. What did they wish to achieve by doing so? Where did it fit in with the design of urban India? Can you give us the context, please?
Jaideep, when five superpowers from the Europe came and settled down on the banks of the river Ganges, it's only the British who established these clubs, and there was a reason. It is their culture that they meet outside their houses, even in England, and there are a large number of clubs in England and as well as the US right now. But the other countries were not in the habit of meeting in clubs. When the British came here, they came as traders. Then they set up the East India Company. But when the British Empire started expanding and when they took over the administration of the city from the East India Company, they had to set up their administrative headquarters in Asia. In fact, this was the largest of their empire outside England, and it spread from Afghanistan to Burma. So it's a huge area which was controlled and administered from Calcutta. So they had to send all their officers, administrators, and all the army officers, senior army officers, they had to come and settle down here for long stints. So two things happened. They had to find accommodation. So therefore, the clubs, served that purpose. And they also had to meet because they didn't have anything to do in their evening hours. So therefore, the clubs came up, and most of the British officers started, establishing clubs in many other places of Calcutta. But Bengal Club was the first social and business club, so to say.
And if I may add, Jaideep, that one of the effects that Parthoda said, the colonization and its effects, that most of these people would leave their families back home. Parthoda, am I right? And they would come as single men. And therefore, the pains of exile, loneliness, and the distaste for housekeeping really was a need for these kind of things, and also to indulge in the sports. They were a very sporty race, and they wanted to play games and sports, and they needed place. And more than that is really a place that the like-minded could meet, because at that time, as you will recall, there were natives and they were the ones who came to colonize the natives. And therefore, these clubs kind of started being their refuge and a place where they could actually come and meet like-minded people, and that's when the formation of clubs. As you can see, this little picture on the top right shows cricket being played, and as you know that we have a club which was one of the oldest clubs in the world, the Calcutta Cricket and Football Club, which was slightly before, but in our genre of a social business club, or rather business club, it was largely the Bengal Club. Over to you, Partho.
Can you put this in context as far as the city of Calcutta was concerned? How was it laid out then?
It was important. I mean, if you look at all the British settlements in Bombay in those days and Madras and Calcutta, Calcutta was the capital city. So therefore, you know, the edifices that we see, all the public institutions in Calcutta, they were in grand scale, and they cannot be compared with what was set up in Madras or Bombay, other than, you know, one or two single buildings which came much later. So all the institutions like the High Court, the Town Hall, the Writers' Building.
If I may, sorry, interject. If you can just take us through first what Jaideep was saying on the map of Calcutta before we come to the edifices. You know, how the town was kind of divided and...
Yes. The settlement started from the east bank of the river. Western side was Howrah, an industrial area. So the British came and settled down here when they built the Fort William to make it secure. Then the White Town actually developed all around Fort William. And the native town slowly grew up on the northern side. People who are doing business with the British and people who came to Calcutta because of the economic sustenance, they all settled down towards the north. There were some settlements which were already there, like Chitpur in the north. So this was more or less the configuration of the city, that we have the Fort William, we have a large padded ground, which is the Maidan, which was created by, you know, cutting down a huge forest, dense forest. And the British town, because they wanted quick access to Fort William and the Maidan, they grew all around the Fort William. And of course, they had to be close to the river as well. So initially, all the edifices that I'm talking about, including the governor's house, which came later on, they were all around this place. When we look at the Treasury building, the High Court, the Town Hall, Writers' buildings, everything was here. So the first building that the Bengal Club chose to occupy was the Gordon's building facing the Maidan. Because as I told you, they always wanted to see the Maidan and the river. But in those days, they had to pay a princely sum of 800 rupees, which was quite a, you know, expensive affair in those days. And they had to vacate that and then move to the Tank Square, which was very important in the sense that all the major office buildings, the administrative establishments there. So the Tank Square had their second establishment before they moved to their own premises, which is on Chorongi, bang opposite the Fort William. And in those days, they paid about 5.5 lakhs, which is a huge sum of money, to acquire a plot of land and construct their own building. If you compare the Bengal Club building with all the other club buildings, Bengal Club's building was much, much grander. But they actually not concerned with the maintenance cost in those days. But one can imagine that such a huge building was difficult to maintain, even for the British. But nevertheless, it was a very important landmark in Calcutta. If you look at the map prepared by Wollaston in 1825, you will see that the pink portion is mostly the British town, and the yellow portion north of Tank Square is the native town. So everybody who's of any importance wanted to be part of that pink town and wanted their edifice along the Chorongi. This is another map showing all the important buildings of Calcutta. And you can see that all the important buildings are all around the Fort William, the Maidan, and Chorongi. That is where they wanted to be. If you look at old aquatins and prints prepared by the Daniels and the O'Doyleys, you will see that people are using the Maidan as much as possible. So everybody wanted to be here. And therefore, Bengal Club chose a very important site and constructed a wonderful building.
So Partho,
Yes.
the landmarks, buildings of Calcutta were all in this area.
Yes. At that point of time, everybody wanted to be around the Maidan. And from the upper floors, they wanted to, see the Ganga, the river, because that was their main source of sustenance.
Right. Yes,
So
like
you can
High
see
Court.
some of these old buildings which were constructed by the British. I mean, these buildings were really grand because the British wanted to establish their superiority over the natives, and they wanted to show what the British are capable of. So if you look at the design of High Court, Writers' Buildings, Town Hall, in those days, you did not have buildings like this in any other cities like Madras, Bombay, and elsewhere.
Right. Sumit, can you tell us something about the beginnings of the Bengal Club itself?
Yeah, sure, Jaideep. I think Partho had already set the tone. Let me quickly take you through what we call the genesis of the club. At the time when, as you will see, at the point in time we're talking about, it was largely people from the services who were coming to explore new settlements and trying to establish themselves. So they were largely from the forces and from the services. And one of them was this very enterprising Lieutenant Colonel, the Honorable C.B. Finch, who at that time, in one of the discussions in the town hall on November 29th, 1826, in a very informal meeting, started talking about setting up something that's very akin to what they are familiar with back home in London. And that time, the whole culture of clubs and, people going and playing games and spending time was very, very possible then. And he was wanting to set this up, and that really initiated the thought of setting up the Bengal Club. And the first clubhouse premises came up in a building in Esplanade West, which has been erected in 1813. They did a kind of a lottery to raise the funds. And at that time, they were also looking at clubs back home. And if you see the picture here, Jaideep, this is the Oriental Club of London. This is really, in 1824, it was a very, very happening club. And I think maybe Lieutenant Colonel Finch was maybe a member of the Oriental Club. And he was kind of looking at that and trying to reimpose or kind of mirror that in Calcutta for his brethren and people who were coming. And therefore, it takes really special mention in our history and our genesis, because a lot of our articles of association and constitution was based on the Oriental Club that was in London in 1824. So that really was the genesis and the thought. What is interesting is that in his notes, when he was trying to get like-minded people of the services to decide that the need for a club like this in Calcutta, and if you see the lines I've highlighted from his notes, says a club which is similar to those instituted in London. So very clearly the benchmarks were set, where someone would come and find a respectable hotel-like thing, because accommodation, Jaideep, was a big problem at that time. And, people who were just getting off the boat before they could find accommodation in the city of Calcutta needed a place to kind of come and kind of familiarize themselves, get used to the climate, acclimatize themselves. And the Great Eastern, as you know, came up much later in 1840, and the Oberoi Grand much, much later. So therefore, the accommodation was a very, very important factor of having this club for people to come and stay. And he goes on to talk about, on a liberal scale of demands, of capital of certain class, talks about command of character and friends, and a place where people can spend idle time agreeably. I like the way that he's worded it, and very importantly, open for accommodation. This whole very upper British kind of exclusivity, which we all pride ourselves with. This exclusive bit was kind of penned down by Lieutenant Colonel Finch way back in 1827.
Not for Indians. Not for Indians.
No, definitely not. And there's a very interesting story that I'll share with all the viewers subsequently. So really, 1st February 1827, to cut a long story short, was our foundation day. And even till 2020, that is our foundation day, and we celebrate it every year. It was established, and what is notable is that this event was recorded in the Government Gazette. And these Gazette documents, Parthoda, I believe, are also there in the library. On the 5th and 8th of February 1827, this was actually mentioned. Very, very important people were inducted into the club. And His Excellency, the Viscount Combemer, was requested to become the patron of the club, because, this whole patronizing and getting funds and, inducting like-minded people, that seemed to be the order of the day. And if you notice, Jaideep, Viscount Combermere was the great-grandson of Stapleton Cotton, the 6th Baronet and the 1st Viscount Combermere, who had fought with Wellington at the Battle of Salamanca. That's the kind of history and legacy. I mean, people who fought at the Battle of their great-grandson, all in the decorated officers, all coming down. There was this land, India, full of riches to be explored. And here we are setting up this jewel for people like them. So as the person who thought about the club, it was decided that Lieutenant Colonel Honorable C.B. Finch, who was incidentally also the military secretary to Viscount Lord Combermere, became the first president of the club. And interesting, if you look at his history, he was the son of the 4th Earl of Ilford, and his regiment was the Blues. And after his service, he kind of moved back and he became promoted, but he didn't last long. He served maybe for a year, and one of the first tasks, as Partho mentioned, was to set up the first clubhouse. And that time they didn't have money or time to build. The importance to build and set this institution up was very, very important. And therefore they found this most spectacular building called the Gordon's Building with a princely sum of 800 rupees per month as rent. And it was a ground and first floor where they had rooms for accommodation on these floors. And the members were asked to pay rupees 4 per week for accommodation purposes. And let me present to you the Bengal Club's first clubhouse, the spectacular Gordon's Building. This, of course, is a painting which I thought was very, very beautiful. It kind of gives you a feeling of what the natives and what they would do. And here are these very interesting buildings that are coming up, these edifices, as Partho talks and will continue talking about. And if you can see, this is really the Gordon's Building, and that's where they were in the ground and first floor, our first club. Well, subsequently, there were changes in the club, in the management. Colonel Finch left, Lieutenant Colonel Finch, and a very interesting gentleman, Charles Metcalfe, who all of us know very well. His memory is kept alive that's what he looks like at the Metcalfe Hall, which is erected at the junction of Hare Street and Strand Road. He was again a son of a Major General. I mean, just, Jaideep, the reason I'm bringing back, you just look at the legacy, Major General's son, so-and-so's grandson, great-grand, all having served of the Imperial Army. He was educated at Eton and returned to India as a writer in 1801. So Charles Metcalfe became the second president. And I mention him because he was perhaps the only, and he is rather the only president who has ever served a term of 11 years. No other president of the club till date has ever served such a long term. And there was a lot of development that happened during his term.
I take it the Constitution permitted Metcalfe to serve for such a long time.
Perhaps. And at that time they would, and then subsequently it was a term of 1 year, but then maybe he was being constantly re-elected back because I think, re-elected rather, so that he could continue for 11 years. And Lord Combermere's departure in 1830, who left as the patron, William Bentinck, another very, very famous person in the history and annals of British India, who was the last Governor General of Bengal and the first Governor General of India, became the second patron. I mean, so this is really the kind of people that thought of setting up this great iconic institution in the city of Calcutta.
So we've heard from Partho that the club had to shift out of the Gordon's Building.
That's correct.
Why was that? Where did it go?
Very interesting question, Jaideep. Let me take you through a little bit through pictorially. We've all been through a lot of financial crisis in our time, but one of the first financial crises to hit the world at that time was in the 1830s. And let me quickly pictorially depict simply what was the financial crisis and what happened. And if you recall, a lot of money was raised through lottery. That was a fund that they had. That fund was used to rent the building, to set up all the artifacts and silverware and things. So there was money and the money was being used. But parallelly, as Partho said, they had already come, they'd started the trading. East India Company was already in operation. And they were largely trading in 5 major commodities at that time: cotton, silk, tea, saltpeter, and the most important commodity, which all of us have read in history, was indigo. And there was a lot of money to be made in indigo. But if people were getting into trading as a business, as you would know, you need financial backing. And what was interesting is that the banks and financial institutions had really not set up in this part of the world. And therefore, what the East India Company did, they seized an opportunity and they realized that here was a time that they could quickly club not only their trading activities, but they set up these agency houses like the ones they had back in London. And Cook and Company or Alexander and Company were these agency houses who actually started operating as banks. And there was a lot of money and thing that was given. And if you can see, these banks then later became the Bank of Hindustan. But what simultaneously, three things happened, Jaideep, in the 1830s. All the money that these agency houses were making, just to increase the impact of trading, they started deploying a lot of these funds into the indigo business. And what happened is that over a time, there was a huge supply, but the demand fell and there was a glut in the market. And obviously the prices crashed. And these banks that had started operating and that astuteness had not yet come in, they couldn't handle that. And people like the Bengal Club, who had already invested and had money in the banks, actually lost out a lot of funds. And that was really, in effect, what happened to the club, a financial crisis. So coupled with the glut in the indigo market, the Anglo-Burmese War also took off in 1825. And therefore, a lot of money went out for deploying to a war. And therefore, again, there was a huge financial bottleneck. And the third, what happened is that the investment boom in Britain had started declining and bank failures were showing up. And that had an effect, again, on the colonies that there were. So this was really a triple whammy, as I put it with this. The glut in the indigo, the first Anglo. So obviously, the funds that had gone in, there were no returns that were coming out of it. And suddenly the club was faced with a huge task of trying to maintain and paying that huge rent, and that they couldn't manage. And what history tells us is that was the time when they took a decision under Metcalfe that they had to give up that glorious, gorgeous building, the Gordon's building, and move to something really, really downscale. They wouldn't give up the whole essence and the spirit of the club. And this is where they actually moved. It was unable to pay the required rent and other financial situations of the club. They moved under Metcalfe's leadership from the Gordon building to an upper-roomed brick-built dwelling house in Tank Square, which is near Dalhousie Square, somewhere there, as you can see. The building is not, because they were really, really very disheartened, I presume, at that time. And it remained there till the building was demolished in 1845. So really those 10 years is where they were there. But what they did was they quickly started amalgamating the funds, because they realized that a club of this stature could not operate in a building such as this.
So in 1845, you moved again.
Yes, we moved again. So
and where did you land up?
Oh, well, that was again the turnaround story again, and very interesting, like ups and downs. So went through that little bit of down, started off on that huge note, and then, interestingly, where do we move? Funds were there, and they were looking around and scouting. And none other than Lord Macaulay's house is where we moved from Tank Square. So in 1845, it moved, and it was actually then called number 1 Park Street in the history, though it's kind of Chowrungi that we know today, and numbers 1 and 1 by 11 Russell Street, where Lord Macaulay lived, and he had lived there as the law member of the Supreme Council between 1834 and 1838. Interestingly, how history kind of amalgamates great people. This is Lord Macaulay, and this house was actually built by another very famous, wealthy zamindar, Jorashakor's Kali Prasanna Shingo. And if you've read Sunil Gangopadhyay's Shei Shamay, the whole fictional aspect of the hero is actually based on Kali Prasanna Shingo. The narrative is through his story. And I would urge all viewers today, if you want to know the history of the glorious 19th century, please do read Sunil Gangopadhyay's Shei Shamay, which has been translated into English, which is Those Days, and a sequel to that called First Light or Prothomalo. And Kali Prasanna Shingo was an extremely astute and a very wealthy and a man of art and all, and he's been known to first translate the Mahabharata in Bangla. Am I right, Patoda?
Yes.
It was Gutum Pachar Naksha, right? Gutum Pachar Naksha, Jaideep. I think that was what it was called. Yeah. And that was his property. This is Kali Prasanna, as you can see him. And he had given this house on lease to Lord Macaulay, and when he left, Bengal Club approached him and he agreed on the lease for first 30 years, and then it was renewed for another 20 years. So that is where we moved, and that's where we were for a couple of years. So let me share some interesting thoughts about Macaulay's house. I think, were you wanting to say something, Jaideep?
No, I was just going to remark about the irony of the British club, which didn't allow Indians setting up shop in the estate of a Hindu zamindar.
They are the ones who have the property then. The British had not started taking over.
Yes.
So Macaulay was very proud of his house, and he had said in his journals that it was the best in Calcutta, and we know that for a fact. And what is very interesting, Jaideep and Partho and all our viewers, is that Lord Dalhousie, you came and visited him in his house, and a former commander-in-chief of the army, describes Macaulay's cook as decidedly the first artist in Bengal. And I share this because, as all of you know who live in Kolkata and elsewhere, that the cuisine in Bengal Club is something to die for, and we believe in fine dining, and Bengal Clubs, the cuisine precedes even whatever else of the club, the great cuisine. And therefore, it goes back right at the time of Dalhousie making a comment. I don't know whether the cook continued with the club, but I presume he set the precedence of the great cuisine that came out. And he further wrote that I have a pretty little garden, not unlike our little grass plot in Clapham, but larger. It consists of a fine sheet of turf with a gravel to walk around it. The kind of grandiose buildings and things that they live, this opulence and this affluence and this whole thing of, while they all served in the army, I think their whole allegiance to the monarchy and, to live like them and to see that, that's where they started living like that when they came to colonies like India. And what you had said right in the beginning was, did he actually write his minutes? Honestly, I hope he did, but we've done a lot of R&D, but there's no evidence that he had actually written it, but we do hope that he had. And as you can see, that this is the address that he gave to the House of Parliament on February 2, 1835, and I'm sharing this to show that this is what our country was, this is what they came and they found about our countrymen at that time. I'm not reading it, but people can read it on the screen. And it's a very proud moment for all of us. I mean, that is where we were, and that's the kind of heritage that even we as natives carried in the eyes of these foreigners.
And did you just occupy the house, or did you
we'll just come to that. So this is really what his house looked like, this very grand building, shot in 1867, as you can see. And this is yet another view of the house in 1890. And you can see how big and grandiose the building was. And then there was another turn of event. May I continue, Jaideep?
Yeah. Yes, of course.
Yeah. So what happened is that, as you recall, I had said that the lease was first renewed for first 30 years. It was extended for another 20 years, and then by which time there was no further renewal of the lease. And at the expiry of the lease, brought a new question of where does the club move now? We've enjoyed the last so many years. From 45, we were there. And where does it move now after these 50 years? And 50 years, the institution had also become extremely popular. The Bengal Club had established itself as one of the most premier clubs and continues to be so. And the management and the general committee at that time were looking at alternative sites. And they had looked at sites, we are told, in the junction of Camac Street and Theatre Road. It was also decided that the old building must be replaced. And so all this discussion was happening. Do we buy it out? Do we buy the land? Do we look at other land? Because there was a need. The lease was expiring. What do we do? And as I think Partho mentioned right in the beginning, in 1907, a very interesting thing happened. The club had already amassed a lot of wealth, and they purchased that freehold for a sum of 5.5 lakhs and formed itself into the first registered company. And even today, Bengal Club is run as a registered company. So all general committee members actually serve like a board of directors. We have a management. It's a limited company. And as you know, we have the AGM. So it continues in the same way. And we had a competition at that time of a new design of the building now that we have the land. And that building had already lived 50 years and we wanted, renovation. And in 1908, it was entrusted to the Bengal Stone Company with J. Vincent Esch as the consulting architect. And he designed what we called the Magnificent Lady on Chaurangi. And let me share that with all our viewers. This is how spectacular that building looked. And whenever we look at the picture, I'm sure all the viewers will see what a proud moment to see this kind of building that came up. And let me take you through a couple of other images. Before I come to that, we talked about Macaulay, and the corporation had requested, because Lord Macaulay was Lord Macaulay, that they instill a tablet in the new building. And it read, "In the house which formerly stood on this site and was dismantled in 1908, resided Thomas Babington Macaulay, law member of the Supreme Council in 1834 to 1838. And what is very interesting is that this tablet, even after this building was demolished and we moved to what is our current premises, this actually adorns, and anyone who steps into the club will see this tablet right at the entrance, along with the Cobra, which we'll come to in a short while from now. So
yes, show us some more pictures.
Yeah, sure. So this is how the majestic building looked during the day. And as you can see, there was a tank in front. And as you know, there were a lot of tanks that were placed. And those tanks were primarily for the horse-driven carriages, for the horses to come and drink water. And this is how majestic the building looked during the day. And again, a very interesting event happened in 1912. King George V was landing in Mumbai. And in his honor, and as I said, that they were all part of the imperial army, all allegiance to the Lord, the king, the monarchy. And this is how the building looked when it was illuminated at night in reverence to his arrival in India. The most, the jewel in the crown that we call. India was always the jewel in the crown, and Mountbatten was perhaps scoffed at when the jewel had to be given away in 1947. So these are some of the pictures of how beautiful the building looked. And Jaideep, I mean, not to take away from the Apollo Bandar Taj Mahal Hotel, we are very proud of the Taj legacy and the Tata legacy in India as Indians. But to say, when we look at an Apollo Bandar building of the Taj Mahal, and now today you look at this, can you deny how majestic this would look? I mean, I think both are so comparable. And as you can see, it was more or less at the same time that the Taj Mahal came up on Apollo Bandar in Mumbai, and this came up on Charangi in Kolkata, and how majestic both these buildings looked. So you did talk about the Cobra, and I think we're very proud we carry that emblem, but let me share a little bit of the story behind the Cobra. So if you recall that we had moved from the Gordon's building to the Tank Square, and there was some development that had to be done, because if you see, that area looked kind of downtrodden and quite bad. And there was a lot of construction to be done. And legend goes that when these workers were trying to build an extension of the foundation on our Tank Square property, they found that a king cobra was living on that premises. And being very superstitious and religious natives, the workers at that time, and there is a term in Bangla called Bastu Shah, because it's a blessed snake that protects your property, they refused to work. They said, no, we cannot do this because this is his house. The cobra lives here. We cannot do that. And there's a lot of worship to the king cobra. So they stopped and refused to work. And apparently a priest was brought in and to worship the king cobra and apparently satisfy him with milk and other goodies. Cobra, having blessed the site, being happy that people actually worship the cobra, actually moved out of the premises and work continued. And in reference to that, I'm told, the then president perhaps and his committee decided that this, because it was his residence that we had taken, will become our emblem and the crest. And that is how it's still engraved on the entrance to our club, and we carry it everywhere. And if you can see, I'm wearing a Bengal Club tie, and you can see my King Cobra on the Bengal Club tie. So that's how proud we are of the King Cobra. And this may be a legend, Jaideep, but the story is based upon some major minor evidence, and history is history. So we will believe that that is very true.
Of course. Unfortunately, most of us have not seen the inside of that magnificent building, and some of us have never seen the building at all. Take us, if you will, through some parts of that building as you may have reconstructed from pictures.
Sure, Jaideep. But there's a little caveat. As you know, this building was again demolished and we moved to the new building, and I'm given to understand we lost a lot of our documents and very nice pictures, and there was a lot of loss that had happened and perhaps a little bit of theft. So the pictures are not the best, but it gives you a flavor. And I proudly present a walk through the majestic Bengal Club building that stood and adorned Charangi. This is how majestic the central cupola looked. And as you can see, it is straddled by the lion, a very, very royal beast and a very important emblem of the British Empire in most of their crests, and anywhere that you see the lion features. In fact, I think the insignia of the Tollygunge Club is also a lion. So anything that had to do with the British had to bring in the lion. This is really the grand entrance and how grand it was. And look at the sense of space. Look at the arches. Look at the beams on top. This was really the hall porter. I'm told that the hall porter in clubs in London had a lot of space to hang their hats, coats and overcoats and things, but maybe in a tropical climate like India, it was largely to kind of book their rooms and, know their functions and things like that. But that was really the reception and the hall porter. Please notice, Partho, that these are called capitals, right? Or a column, if I'm not mistaken, these areas.
That's right, yeah.
Look at the kind of design, the ornate design on all these capitals. Brilliantly done. Look at the columns, the structures, the beams that went, and those really, high ceilings. Partho will take us through more about high ceilings subsequently. Yes. This was really the hallway. And again, if I may, with the pointer, show you how beautiful these capitals were designed, each of them. Very, very typical of the British architecture. And if you see, these were all marble floors and checkered in black and white marble to give this very, very majestic design. This was the coffee room veranda, which overlooked the Maidan and the river. So I'm told that people could sit and enjoy their cup of coffee in the afternoon, or maybe after a meeting, or they were relaxing or lounging, and actually take in a lot of the west wind that came in from the river. Of course, at that time, you didn't have pollution, you didn't have high rises, and I'm told it was the best place that you could view the river and the Maidan, the green expanse. This is the approach to the Reynolds Room, and I'm very proud to say that we still have the Reynolds Room today in our club, named after the famous painter, Sir Joshua Reynolds. A dining room that you can see, spectacular. And you can see this whole concept of this ground and this top floor with maybe the rooms were up there and these very tall arches and all these capitals very well ornated and designed. This was the reading room, because the library, as you know, is still one of the biggest assets of the Bengal Club. And it continued to be then. And I think over the time, the members and all the committees had ensured that they would have the best reading room and the library. And this was really a plush reading room for people to come and lounge and read. No digital electronics at that point in time. So books and journals and gazettes were all available. This is a very interesting picture, Jaideep. I kept telling you that accommodation was important. And accommodation at that time meant when you come to a tropical climate and you're out in the sun and the heat and the grime, you want to come back and have a good hot shower. And a hot shower means you need a good geyser. And this was really typical of the geysers that were installed in the rooms of this majestic building with the bathtub, so that all the barasabs and memsabs could come and enjoy a hot shower and then perhaps lounge out at the coffee veranda or go for their dinner, and then after that a brandy and cigar. Silver bells and artifacts. Everything that you saw in Bengal Club were vintage, beautifully done, a lot of silver. These were some of the bells that were used to ring for service. There were no electrical bells at that time. Some of the trophies that we won. This is really an agdan, which is nothing but an ashtray, silver ashtray. This is, as you can see, the clocks, and we have a huge collection of clocks. And if I were to move on, we are very proud of some of these relics and legacies that we've inherited. And I say that in this slide, that all that glitters at Bengal Club is silver. Because as you can see, from salt and pepper croquet, to jugs, to fruit bowls, to a gavel, to candle stands, to even the ink pot maybe at the registration desk when people were signing in, to crockery, cutlery, and milk pots, everything was sterling silver. And I'm very proud to say that a lot of it has been restored. We've kept them treasured in a vault very safely. But this is the kind of opulence and the kind of show Bengal Club was all about, because you wouldn't be served in anything other than the finest of bone china and the best of sterling silver and the fine muslin linen. That was Bengal Club.
Silver gavel.
Sorry.
A silver gavel.
Yes, yes.
That's grand indeed.
Yes. And of course, we are very proud of some of our original work of art that we have. The Bay of Naples, which adorns our club even now, by Joseph Femenek. The Fortune Teller, and there are stories of this, but I won't take away for paucity of time. We can do another session on the art that we have at the club and the landscape. But so it really, I can't say that we were the best art gallery, but I think what I'm trying to portray to our viewers, that here was this institution that served the best. It believed in the best, whether it was from crockery to cutlery to design to work of art to, you know, the ambience, to the kind of people who came, to the grandeurs, to the books, to the library, to the intelligentsia, the intellectual. It was the finest.
And in all this grandeur, there must have been great events as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I will run you through a couple of them very, very interestingly. The Prince of Wales, not the Prince of Wales who became king. We're talking of 1921, and this is Prince Edward, the elder brother, or the first child of King George V, who was supposed to take over the throne. And he had come to visit his colony because he served for a year. But even as the Prince of Wales, we are told in history that he did tour a lot, and he did tour a lot to the colonies to see. And we had the proud privilege of hosting him at the Bengal Club. You can see that he came down on December 30th, 1921, Prince Edward, and he's addressing the crowd at Victoria Memorial. And we presented him with the Silver Agdan. And as you know, that smoking was not a taboo. And if people are watching the Netflix, The Crown, and if you go back in time, you will see that even his father, King George VI, his father, and all of them, and Princess Margaret, everyone was smoking. In fact, the Duke of Edinburgh actually had to quit smoking because Queen Elizabeth didn't like him smoking. But smoking was part of the culture. And therefore, the Silver Agdan, which was very typical of the Bengal Club of sterling silver, was presented to him. That was one of the major events in 1921. Of course, in 1927, we had the centenary celebration. But as you know, being a very exclusive club, the club never believed in too much of fanfare outside its own premises. It was very exclusive, elite, and closed door. And that's the way Bengal Club has always functioned. Very low profile and within itself. And a banquet was held. And as you can see, 138 members were present. The traditional toasts were raised to the first patron and the president. And I'm very happy to say that even today, on 1st of Feb, every foundation day, our president and vice president raises the same toast that was done in 1927 and before that in 1827, and telegrams. And this is the very interesting thing about the origin of the club, because they all came from the Imperial Army, the allegiance to the crown, and everything went with what the monarch felt. And this was really like, you know, the subject of the monarch, giving the monarch due respect. And this telegram was sent from the club secretary to the Majesty. And as you can read, the private secretary from the Sandringham Palace wrote back to the club. And these have all been documented.
How did the club, and in fact the city of Calcutta, lose that jewel on the Chaurangi?
You brought us to now the very sad part of the presentation, something that we don't feel very good talking about, but it is history, it's a fact. It really was the end of the grand building. And as Partho will also tell you in subsequently when he'll talk, that because of it being so exclusive and what we understand, having now gone and delved into the history, it was a very small membership. But the way things were done and the majesticity with which the club operated, we actually were not being able to maintain and kind of manage the funds. The funds or the inflows that were coming in and the expenses that were happening. And this was, I think, accumulating over a period of time. And I think finally the bubble burst in 1969 when the club ran into huge debts. But the club kept maintaining that it will not increase membership. It will only choose the right kind of members, and it will be very, very exclusive. So in keeping with that tradition, which I gather which happened in 69, we ran into this major financial crisis, and I'll leave it at that. And therefore, this whole land, which actually housed this building, was sold off to the Grindlays Bank, the then Grindlays Bank. And then Grindlays apparently sold it. And what you see today on that land is really the Chatterjee International Center. For those viewers who are familiar with Kolkata, if people are logging in from outside, the Chatterjee International Center, the Metro Rail Bhavan, these are the ones that really took over that land. And as you rightly said in the beginning, that in the quagmire of those high rises lies this wonderful. But this is what we are left with. This is really the large part of the annex, which you can't see in the earlier photographs I showed you. I'm given to understand that this was the rear annex of the grand old building, which had an entrance from Russell Street. And because it was largely, and I want to make this point because there's a lot of debate on why it was such a gentleman's club. Because if you look at now the history and origin and the legacy of the club, it was only the men who had come out, you know, all crossing these 7 seas to this uncharted colony of India and left their wives and children and daughters and mothers behind in London. So it really started off as a men's club. And men would really come, and it was largely benefiting the membership to the male generation. And of course, subsequently, the wives and the ladies and the did start frequenting the club, but there was an annex for them as well. And the entrance was them. And this, I believe, was it. So really, in a nutshell, Jaideep, this was, I will just kind of sum up to say, we ran into huge financial crisis, huge debts. We had to sell off the land, and that land then came up as these buildings that came up. And what we were left is what you see in the pictures. Still a very, very grandiose facade. If you stand at the car park and look, and especially when it's lit at night, you get reminiscences and pictures of what that grand building would have looked like.
So that was a very severe blow to the club. Must have taken a lot to recover from that.
Yes.
But life must go on.
Yes.
So what happened after this?
So I'll quickly take you through. So 1977 was our sesquicentennial year, 150 years. And again, as I said, very low profile, only members from 138 that you saw earlier. Centenary, we had come down to 125 members. But interestingly, our then president, the late Mr. Aurobindo Ray, was in the chair. The governor, A.L. Dias, was the chief guest. John Thompson, the British High Commissioner, flew down from New Delhi. And on 1st Feb 1977, a ball was held and decided to host the Foundation Day every year after that, and which we continue to do. And what is interesting is that we had a very interesting menu card. And I told you that gourmet and cuisine go with Bengal Club hand in hand. They're synonymous. And if you look at the menu card, you'll see the consomme camembert, the bectiala outram, or the legume metcalf. So all are a tribute to all. And you also see some Indian, because by which time in 77, mid-60s, the Indians started becoming members. So you have mutton bhi Irani, you have choksi coming in there, the chicken choksi curry. So you had Indians who also started playing a big role in the club as the agency system and the British started moving. So that menu card was very interestingly designed to celebrate the 150 years.
We've also, thankfully, by that time, Indians were welcome in the club.
Yes.
But tell us a bit about who wasn't welcome in the club.
Okay, we'll come to that. We've had very, very famous visitors. Of course, this is Prince Edward, the Prince of Wales, who came, and I showed you in the year that he came in 1921. The President V.V. Giri himself had come. Pele has come and adorned the club. Our past Chief Minister, Jyoti Basu, who ruled this city for many, many years, was a frequent patron. But this is the most interesting story of the club. The man who we regard as the one who gave us the freedom from the British dominance, the father of the nation, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, visited Kolkata rather, in 1896. He came back 3 months later in 1896. Didn't know anyone in this. This is how he looked. He had not become the father of the nation. He had just come back from South Africa. And obviously, Calcutta being the capital, he had to come to Calcutta. And he was staying at the Great Eastern Hotel. And at the Great Eastern Hotel, he acquainted a gentleman by the name of Alan Thorpe, who was the journalist living there. They got talking. He wanted to know. And Alan Thorpe was living at the Bengal Club and invited Gandhiji over for a meal. And Gandhiji visits Bengal Club, and Alan Thorpe is very politely said, "Sir, natives and Indians are not allowed." Very embarrassing moment for Alan Thorpe. He had to actually then escort him to his private room and not be able to entertain him in the public places, but really apologize his inability to make him sit in that very plush drawing room, and sorrow at regarding the prejudice of the local Englishmen at that time. And so he was actually refused. And Partho, I think this is true. Am I right? This has actually been documented. So while there were visitors who came much later, Mr. Gandhi was one of the first who had come and was not given that welcome.
So how old are you now, the club?
So we are 193 years old. Another 7 years, we are in our bicentennial, 200 years. And this is how beautifully the club looks even today, of whatever we've been able to keep as our legacy. And we're very proud of that. This is our entrance, and this is really the driveway. And if I may share with you, you talked about, and this is as you enter is where the Cobra is engraved in brass. And this is where the potters are right there. Partho, that's where the tablet is inscribed. Am I right?
Yes, on the
So
wall,
you
yes.
drive in through this gate and you come in, and this is where you alight and you enter. And once you enter and you go into the left, this is really what the hall porter looks like, our reception area. This is what the Salon 175 is, the 175th. These rooms are named after these very important years in the history of the club, which was then renovated because it needed renovation. And I think we're going to come to that very soon. This is what our room 300 looks, the room that was named after the 300th year of the city. And it adorns a lot of the paintings, as you can see. A lot of our dinners, hostings, meetings are held in both these places, a lot of our functions. This is the earlier Millennium room, which has now been converted to a coastal cuisine restaurant, fine dining coastal cuisine, accommodates around 20-25 people. And of course, the pride of Bengal Club, which is our library. Really is a place, and a lot of our new members, one of the reasons why they want to join as they move on in age is really to spend their time at the library. Not only is it an absolute storehouse of information, it is also a great place to lounge and relax. And as you can see, this is our reading room. And we've also ensured that we've kept up with the times. We are not in the past. We have a lot of digital equipment. We have a lot of audiovisual today, journals, books, films, all our shows, functions. So people do come and lounge in the club. So that's really the club. And that's where we are 193 years from now.
Partho, you are
Yes.
a conservation architect. You are in charge of the heritage of the club today.
Yes.
You've been involved in the restoration of heritage buildings across Kolkata, and we are very proud to have you as a committee member. Tell us your experience as far as the restoration of the club is concerned today.
If you look at this plan, Jaideep, it shows the entire site accessible from Russell Street, and also there is a narrow lane on the left, yes, which connects this property to Chorungi Road. But actually our address is Russell Street. The entry is and exit are from Russell Street. So therefore our entrance portico, as you saw in the photograph, is from Russell Street. And the portico leads to this old building on the left hand side next to the lawn, which is an old load-bearing structure, which may have been an extension of the old building because it has high ceiling, about 15-foot high ceiling, and walls are quite thick. Some of them are 2 feet thick, some of them are a meter thick, 3.5 feet. But what was there in the old building is, we had only about 500 members as per the club's rules laid down in those days. But gradually the number of members increased. So therefore the club realized that it has to expand. And it decided to add another wing on the right hand side that you see, that is the new wing. And also next to the square staircase down below, they added 2 more toilets, the ladies and the gents toilets at the ground floor, which could be accessed from room 175, which is the central hall marked in yellow. So this is the basic configuration of the club that we have today. And if you go to the next slide, you will see that I colored the old structure in red. This is the heritage building. And what is colored in blue is the new addition, which is constructed with columns and beams, contemporary structure, which came up in the mid-70s. And this had to be constructed as per the Calcutta Corporation bylaws. Therefore, the floor heights are 11 foot or so. So it does not match with the floor levels of the old building. So when we do restoration and retrofitting of a club like this, we have this problem of, deciding on what to do in the old building and what to do in the new building, because these two have to be two absolutely separate systems.
Yes, I was about to ask you that. The Bengal Club is a living, functioning institution. People go in there every day and use the building.
Yes.
What are the challenges that you face in restoring and conserving such a building where there is constant activity?
You have touched upon a very important point. When we restore buildings, it's easier to restore a building which is not being used, like a temple, let's say, or maybe a church which is seldom used. But for an institution like Bengal Club, which is similar to, a university building, a Jorashako, or a hospital building, which is being used constantly, we have to really debate and decide as to which material to choose and what system to adapt. So similarly, in Bengal Club, when we do restoration of the old part, we really have to decide what to use and when should we start and when should we complete the restoration. Because there are events, there are days which cannot be ignored. So we have to time ourselves that we have to start our restoration on a particular day. We have to end it on a particular day because there are events, for instance, 25th of December, Foundation Day, and, the pujas and stuff like that. So choosing the material and the system becomes very important for the heritage part of the hotel. The new part is comparatively easier. But when we do a restoration of a building like this, mainly the problem lies with the walls and the roofs. And there are other problems also in a club like this, that, it has to be comparable with all the other clubs, and it has to satisfy the needs of our members. And also we have to look at the statutory compliances. So therefore, together with all the measures that we undertake, we have to look at fire safety, we have to provide barrier-free access, and we have to, treat our kitchen waste, build a sewage treatment plant, do rainwater harvesting and groundwater recharging. These are the statutory compliances. So when we decide on how to do the restoration, we have to constantly think of whether we are flouting any of these rules. So that's a big challenge in a building like this.
And then there are the demands of your members today.
Yes, these are demands of a modern society, that we have to install elevators, air conditioning, we have to provide for car parking, we have to have sufficient artificial illumination. At the same time, there are green building norms that we have to depend less on artificial illumination and provide for natural ventilation and light. We have to constantly take care of our electrical wires and cables, because most heritage buildings, heritage properties are built with inflammable objects, a lot of wood everywhere. We have to have CCTV connection, and of course there is computerization, so a lot of cables and stuff. So this is something which is very, very important in the conservation process.
And this retrofitting, as you call it,
yes,
has its own problems.
Yes, of course. I mean, when we you see, the loading patterns in all old buildings have changed. If you look at the Jorashako Thakurbari, for instance, it used to be a residential building for maybe 50 people. Now it's an university with more than 2,000 students. Similarly, Bengal Club, it started with about 500 members, now has 1,600. So therefore, the footfall has increased, the loading pattern has changed. So therefore, whenever we restore or renovate a floor, we have to continuously strengthen whenever possible. So we have to introduce, steel sheets, steel beams, and we have to waterproof roofs and strengthen the roofs from the top. And we have to, fireproof our wooden staircases. Of course, wooden staircases can't be made fireproof. They can be made fire resistant, because all the paints and chemicals which are available in our country do not make them fireproof really. So that's a continuous process. And I'm in favor of removing false ceiling in any heritage building. But in a club, people have fond memories of this old decorative false ceiling. So there are places where we do the restoration and strengthening, retrofitting of the roof, but we have to bring back the false ceilings, which I'll show you later in some of our photographs. So we have to, constantly monitor our structural members, because at times we see that some part may have fallen down inside the false ceiling. So we have to remove the false ceiling, do the repairs, and rebuild the false ceiling again. And we have to constantly do an electrical and energy audit because of our fire safety measures. I'll show you some of the existing conditions of the club, some of the areas of the club. I mean, before restoration, this was the condition of the toilet ceiling and the wall. Because it was covered with false ceiling, we could not see, the top 3 feet of the walls, and of course the ceiling, which was falling. It was falling off. You'll see that this ceiling was, this room was a later addition. Therefore, it was cast in concrete. And in those days, people used to use brick bats and not stone chips in the concrete. And brick bats, absorbs a lot of moisture. So when we took off the false ceiling, we had to treat the white ants, the termites, and put a steel sheet supported by steel beams. Because on top of this room is a smoker's room, which we can't vacate. It is constantly being used, and we could not even tell them to vacate or to leave for 2 months, during which the renovation took place. It happens in all the rooms throughout the building. So therefore, you can see the part of the steel sheeting and the beams that we are doing. This is the wooden staircase, which was initially covered in a red carpet, but in our kind of climate, the staircase is not air conditioned, therefore it absorbs a lot of moisture, and it is very, very difficult to maintain a carpet. So we have now decided to do a coat of fire resistant paint and polish the wooden staircase. Footfall has increased, so therefore it will be difficult to maintain, but nevertheless, we have to keep polishing and keep painting the wooden staircase. This is one of the difficulties. When we do restoration, we realize that many people in India are not really aware of the current practices of restoration elsewhere in the world. And I'll show you through my photographs that, contemporary materials like reinforced steel, stainless steel reinforcement, concrete, steel and glass, these things are always used in restoration of old buildings. This is an example of what Sir Bernard Fielding has done in the York Minster in England. And you can see the thickness of the concrete slab which was introduced below the columns, otherwise they could not be saved. And this is very important. And the small dots that you see on the concrete are really stainless steel reinforcement rods which were provided. So this is something which is very important, but and also these kind of thing takes time. It was possible because it's a church building. For a building which is constantly in use, it is very difficult to dig up the entire floor, the basement, or the foundation and introduce new concrete foundations. I will also show you some photographs of what is happening elsewhere in the world. I mean, this is just to make people aware that how to accept new materials in extension and restoration of old building. And for this, I am really thankful to this Calcutta Heritage Collective, because they have given me this opportunity to show these photographs to the viewers that, when extensions happen, it is as per UNESCO guidelines completely, that what is put should be in total contrast so that you can understand what was old and what is new. And it is completely reversible. The reason why we use steel and glass is that it is reversible. The photograph on the left is that of an abandoned church in Spain, which was converted into a series of conference halls and convention center. And the central building is, of course, a military history museum in Dresden, Germany. And the addition that you see, the steel and glass triangle coming out, this was done by a very well-known architect, Daniel Libeskind, who has designed the new World Trade Center in New York now. And the building on the right-hand side, which is one of my favorite example, is the Hearst building on 6th Avenue in New York, where the old 6-storied building was retained, the facade was retained, and Lord Norman Foster, the architect, designed this steel and glass 80-storied building. Because, the memory has been retained. What is important is when you walk through any street, what you see on both sides is the memory of a city. That has been retained and that has been strengthened. So in order to maintain this facade, a lot of strengthening was required. And on top of that, the steel and glass has been done to suit the requirement of the client, the Hearst Corporation. I'll show you some of the photographs of completed, restored the dining hall. This is with the false ceiling. So we had sufficient money to renovate only 50% of the dining hall, and I wanted to take the false ceiling off completely, but we cannot do a restoration by making all our old members and past presidents unhappy, and they all wanted the old false ceiling because they have such fond memories. So I had to reconstruct the false ceiling again. So this is one photograph. The next photograph shows the restored toilet below our smoking room and adjoining the staircase block of the old part of the Bengal Club building.
Partho, I'm told that there is a new initiative for conserving the heritage of the club by way of a fund.
Yes, Jaideep, thank you for reminding me. I mean, this is something, a grand gesture by the members of Bengal Club. The request was made by our past president and to create a heritage conservation fund. I mean, this is not mandatory. So whoever wants can contribute to this heritage conservation fund, because we need to spend a lot of money in the upkeep and maintenance of the club. So fortunately, because we have this funding from our members, we can gradually, restore and retrofit and strengthen the old building.
So we have a little time for questions from the audience.
Yeah, so before we come to that, Jaideep, the questions, I'll just leave this thought with everyone. This is really summing up the movement of the Bengal Club to where it is today, and therefore we can have the questions with this in the background.
Yes, that's wonderful.
That's a wonderful idea. I hope that it inspires you to answer these questions. So one of the questions which I received is from Nikita. Has the club considered using solar panels and other environmentally conscious means in its restoration?
Partho, please go ahead.
No, sorry, can you repeat that, please?
Whether the club is considering using solar panels and other environmentally friendly resources in its restoration.
Yes, we explored that because I think the Pollution Control Board will want all the institutions to install solar panels. So we had approached some vendors and consultants, and we were planning to put solar panel on the new portion of the roof, and we realized that it will cost us about 24 lakhs, and it can give us maximum of 50 kilowatts. But because we have the Strategy International Center and the Metro Rail building, this 50 kilowatt is not certain. I mean, it will change from season to season, and during the monsoon months, we may not have 50 kilowatts. So we decided that we'll not do it at the moment because we have other priorities areas to attend to, and we'll take a call later on as to what to do with the solar panels.
Right. Mr. Rajiv Soni says, does the Bengal Club library have any old rare books and manuscripts? Sumit?
Yeah, it does. In fact, I think we are very proud of the fact that we have a lot of the first editions, old editions. And I think Partho also, we were discussing that we also have the gazettes, right? The original gazettes and documents.
Calcutta, the Imperial Gazettes, yes.
Imperial Gazettes are there. So it is really a storehouse for historians and people like that. So very, very, very good books in the collection. We've also started a vernacular section now. We have Bengali, we have Hindi, and we have the audiovisual section. So we've also kept up with times and expanded through not just books, but also books and other audiovisual learning devices.
Right. You've shown us such lovely pictures of your silver. So naturally, there is a interest in it. Mukul Agarwal wants to know whether the silverware is all locked up all the time, or have you taken it out and used it on special occasions?
No, as I said, we do use it on our foundation day. which is our it's like Founders Day back in schools and things. We hold it very solemnly. And I think, Partho, if I'm not mistaken, that is the day that the entire grandeurs of yesteryears come out. We are all dressed in formals. There's a toast, and all the cutlery, crockery, and all the silverware comes out at that time. But right through the year, it's difficult to maintain. It's difficult to have. Times are tough, and we can't afford to have sterling silverware all over the place. So we have to keep it.
We have time for one last one. Mr. Hirok Shen points out that Vincent Esch was the architect of other important buildings in Calcutta, like the Victoria Memorial Hall. Could you speak a little more of the role of Esch in the design and construction of the present club building?
You see, we don't have drawings of the present club building, but I can show some, I can discuss some elements of the old building. You know, in the British colonial buildings, I mean, there was a tendency of ending the building with these cupolas and mansards. So in Bengal Club, we see, you know, 5 such things, 4 on 4 corners and 1 at the center. And if you look at the facade, you can make out that maybe the top floor and maybe 1 floor below were dedicated for residential accommodation, and the ground and the first floor had other public activities. But unfortunately, no plans have been kept. I don't know whether some will be available in England, but I cannot comment on the architecture because without seeing the drawings, it's very difficult.
Well, we've already overstepped our time, but that was absolutely fascinating to hear about the development, the loss, and the restoration of heritage. It has been a pleasure to have both of you on this program, Sumit and Partho, 2 people who are directly involved in the initiatives for restoring and preserving this property. And of course, thanks to Mr. Shomendra Mukherjee, President of the club, for allowing us viewers access to these materials and make it possible for us to have had this program. Thank you all for joining in today. Remember, this is the World Heritage Week for the year 2020, and everybody's participation in the preservation of heritage is what we wish to encourage. Good night and stay well.
Thank you, Jaideep.
Thank you very much, Jaideep. And we would like to also thank the Calcutta Heritage Collective on behalf of everyone at Bengal Club for giving us this opportunity to share with you our rich legacy, our history, and the restoration efforts that Partho is spearheading for the club in today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.